after prior cesarean. And I would also agree that there probably is a subset of cesarean section that licensed midwives aren't going to want to attend at home, that everybody could probably come to agreement on.
And when maybe we should just, as a broad background, like the risks associated with VBAC, and basically in 3 categories would be risks with the placenta, problems with the placenta, which we're going to find in pregnancy, and the woman's going to be, and then she's going to fall into another category here where you have a lower lying placenta or a previa or another placental anomaly, so that's already on this list, or uterine rupture, which is a less than 1% chance for a woman who's had 1 low transverse incision, or an unplanned repeat cesarean. Like if you're going to call that a risk, then that is a possible outcome, would be an unplanned repeat cesarean. And when we're looking at risk, it's valuable to look at the risk versus the benefit. So if we're looking at the risk versus benefit for a woman choosing to have care with a licensed midwife, the potential benefit is we're looking at an approaching 90% successful vaginal birth rate. If you had a number, 86, I think you said, for California.
So this is not just for California, but for women who do not have a prior vaginal delivery, who are having their first vaginal delivery with their VBAC. Research has shown that the rates in hospital birth are about 63%. That's per Mercer 2008. And then if we look at women who are birthing at home for their first VBAC, the rates are about 86%, and it goes up to, I think, about 94% at home when they have a prior vaginal delivery. So the difference between 63% and 86% is pretty considerable, and so that's why a lot of women choose to, when they're going for the home VBAC route, they see the larger likelihood of success.
And so what that means is not only are they achieving their desired outcome, just as an idea, but because you have about a 15 to 20% better chance of having a VBAC at home, you have less chance of complications from the unplanned cesarean you didn't have. So there is definitely downstream benefit associated with the option to have an out-of-hospital VBAC because the success rates are higher. And if we're looking at a transfer rate, an unplanned cesarean rate around 10%, that's kind of similar to our first-time mom rate anyway. And none of us are considering the possibility of having a first-time mom be in and of itself a risk factor here.
I can appreciate that. I do want to be careful about comparing those 2 categories based on the percentage, because based on the articles that we've probably all read, if something goes wrong during a VBAC, it's very, very, very serious.
Well, the same transfer protocols that midwives have at home for, say, a cord prolapse or shoulder dystocia, those same protocols would also apply to a uterine rupture. So rapid diagnosis and transfer, calling ahead to the facility that they're transferring to, readying the OR, all of these same protocols would come into play when a uterine rupture was suspected. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel in terms of what do we do if there's one suspected. There's a protocol in place.
I'd just also like to clarify that when a uterine rupture takes place, it is not necessarily a disaster. There are quite a number of ruptures that are small.
And I didn't say disaster. I said it's very serious.
But not always. Not always. So that's got to be put into the whole picture. Yes, it can be catastrophic. Believe me, I know that. I'm just trying to do a bigger picture.
And when I'm talking about the rates of transfer for unplanned cesarean, between a first-time mom, obviously not having a prior cesarean, and somebody transferring that 10%. I'm not talking about rupture. I mean, the rupture risk is already separately its own number. You know, it's already the less than 1%-ish chance of rupture. So yeah, I didn't mean to include that in there.
So, since we're talking about cord prolapse, and it's really easy to look things up on the web now as you sit here, I just like to put something in perspective. The incidence, and this is from contemporary OBGYN, modern medicine, the incidence of umbilical cord prolapse is estimated to be between 1.4 and 6.2 per 1,000 pregnancies. That's, you know, we're close on the risk between cord prolapse and uterine rupture.
1.2 to 6.2, which is close to the 6.2 is very close. To 0.5%, which is less.
In my criteria for attending home VBACs, I like women to be within 20 minutes of the hospital so that we can call ahead and have them ready, and that is different. When I first was practicing, I was often an hour and a half out from a hospital, and now I'm never more than 45, 50 minutes out, but I don't like doing VBACs that are way far away. It feels unsafe. So most midwives do have some criteria for attending VBAC births, and the amount of time it takes to get a crew together for a section in the hospital is the same amount of time as it takes if I were to call and say, I suspect uterine rupture, please be ready, which has never happened. And I've transferred I've transferred 5 out of 70 women who were VBACs, 2 delivered vaginally and 3 by repeat cesarean. So, anyhow, I know that most midwives have a different set of criteria. Like I take vitals more often, and I'm much more watching for weird, this hurts.
Now, I've heard midwives say that before, that it takes just the same amount of time to transfer women from home to the hospital and have the care team ready to go as it does if she was already there in the hospital having to assemble the care team. What's the authority for that?
A good relationship with your hospital.
I mean,
I don't have a
where
written.
I would be, because I mean that's important information for
It's
me
true
to
in a
consider,
hospital that doesn't
and
have
so-
an anesthesiologist in the house.
Can I
Well,
address that
my
issue?
doctors will say that if an anesthesiologist is in the house, that it might take longer to have him or her available, because if they're in-house, they might be with another patient. So, it's just, I've never had an emergency with a VBAC transfer.
Yeah. Kate Gibson. It has a lot to do with whether it's a tertiary care hospital or a level 2 or level 1. That how many people are in-house already has to do with the level of care present all the time. Also, hospitals, many of the kind of medium-sized hospitals are now beginning to hire what they call laborists or hospitalists, so that there is actually a physician and obstetrician present all the time, which would make this go faster than if they have to bring in somebody from home. And again, there may be an anesthesiologist present, but who's already in the middle of something else, which would delay the ability. But it's somewhere probably between 15 to 30. I used to be an L&D nurse, and it's somewhere between 15 to 30 minutes, depending on all of these little wrinkles.
So I would say it's experiential more than, and from talking to other midwives around the state, than something that I have evidence for.
Well, and as you mentioned earlier, knowing how it's going to be managed in the hospital versus at home, isn't actually helping us, meet the statute, the wording of the statute. In many cases, it is going to be true that it's definitely going to be faster in the hospital. If you're in a tertiary care center, the ORs are empty, they're fully staffed with the nurses, they haven't sent them home yet if they're not at the bedside. If everything falls into place, it can be extremely fast in the hospital. But that's not going to be the case always, and it's going to vary so much by the type of hospital and the type of staffing and how far the mom is from home. There are a variety of protocols out there, whether they're in state regulations or just sort of voluntary protocols that midwives may have about how far they're willing, the distance from a woman's home to the hospital. But I don't think that's something that we really have the authority to put in here, but it's certainly something that we all take into account because it does make a difference with how far away they are.
And that's true with any obstetrical complication where you have oxygen compromised. I mean, distance matters. So this, as I said before, it's the same protocols that would be applied to a uterine rupture, or prolapse.
So if we're literally just looking at likelihood, the actual likelihood of a very serious negative outcome from a VBAC at home is quite low, and the likelihood of a spontaneous vaginal birth at home is high. Sort of the bottom line for what we have from the evidence. For a woman with one low transverse incision, or possibly two, that there's less evidence there, greater than two, or with a different location of incision, all of those numbers definitely change.
And part of the informed consent process is letting the mom know that impact of distance and the impact of response time. Just as when you are having a VBAC at a hospital that doesn't have 24/7 anesthesia, that's a conversation that anesthesia has with the mom and says, look, I'm on call, I might be 30 minutes away in the event of an emergency or in the event of you want pain relief, that's something you're going to have to wait for. And that's all part of the informed consent process, which the mom is the ultimate decision maker on which risks and benefits would be tolerable to her, as she's the one who is ultimately bearing the consequences of either that uterine rupture and that delivery, or the future complications of multiple repeat cesareans, namely Accreta being the most serious of those.
Nobody's mentioning the risk to subsequent babies. That when women have a prior cesarean and they get pregnant again, they have a higher rate of stillbirth. They actually have a higher rate of infertility. They have a higher rate of even getting pregnant, they have troubles getting pregnant. The downstream complications are not isolated, and that has to be a part of the picture and the informed consent.
Sorry, I just thought of another great stat. So the rate of uterine rupture after one prior low transverse cesarean is about 0.5% in a spontaneous delivery that's not induced or augmented. But once a woman has 2 prior cesareans, her risk of placenta accreta is about 0.57%, so it's higher. And so we're literally exchanging the risk of uterine rupture in that current pregnancy for the risk of accreta in future deliveries. And unfortunately, it's often not relayed to women in that language, in that clear